Good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, August 30th. It's a special committee of the whole meeting. And at this time, if we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Thank you. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just for the record, we have an Alderman Wagner, 7th Ward Alderman, who is away on business but would like to attend tonight's meeting, so we are doing that via telephone conference. So when we call the roll, I believe Alderman Wagner is. Alderman Wagner, are you here? Let's see.
I'm here.
He's here. Okay. And to establish a quorum, I'd ask Clerk Spencer to call the roll, please.
Gutenkopf.
Here.
Pezza.
Here.
Shea. Absent. Leader.
Here.
Rose.
Here.
Graham.
Here.
Hipskin.
Here.
York.
Here.
Nybo. Absent. Healy. Absent. Morley.
Here.
Kennedy. Absent. Mulliner.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
10 present, 4 absent.
10 present, 4 absent. We have an official quorum. And at this time, I would like to go, we don't have public forum listed on our agenda, but I will, at this time, open up to public forum. I believe Clerk Spencer has collected some names. And what I would like to do is keep public forum to a 3-minute interval. We will keep time when Clerk Spencer calls your name. If you could please state your name and address and come to either the microphone to my right or to my left. Upon her calling your name, that would be terrific. So, Clerk Spencer, we have...
We do. Robert Farr, 285 Geneva Avenue.
Robert Farr, 285 Geneva Avenue, 300 block of Geneva Avenue. I'll read fast to try to fit it all in 3 minutes. 12 things I've learned since the Elmhurst flood of July 24th, 2010. Number one, probably over 1,000 concerned citizens showed up for an emergency flood-related meeting on Monday evening, July 26th. Many were turned away because there wasn't enough room for everybody. Number two, about 10 concerned citizens showed up at the first City Council meeting after the flood on Monday evening, August 2nd. Note to self, generally speaking, Elmhurst citizens are not concerned about flooding in Elmhurst and will not get involved to influence change in the community regarding flooding. This is partly because many residents left the July 26th meeting with an impression that their city government was not competent and does not care about the citizens' concerns, so why bother? Number three, at the flood-related meeting on Monday evening, July 26th, four aldermen thought that my address might be in their ward. The next day, and several times subsequent, I attempted to contact the mayor's office, the city manager's office, and all 4 aldermen. Nobody has gotten back to me except Alderman Michael Bram, who is not one of my aldermen. To 3rd Ward Alderman Bram, thank you for getting back to me multiple times, even though I am not in your ward. To 4th Ward Alderman Stephen Hipskind, it has been over a month since the flood. Please don't bother to get back to me. To 4th Ward Alderman Kevin York, it has been over a month since the flood. Please don't bother to get back to me. To City Manager Borchardt's office, it has been over a month since the flood. Please don't bother to get back to me. To Mayor Peter DiCiani's office, it has been over a month since the flood. Please don't bother to get back to me. Number 4, an extraordinary number of Elmhurst residents power their homes on a regular basis on beautiful sunny days by firing up generators or running 300-foot extension cords across the street to the side of the block that always has power. Many Elmhurst residents are afraid to leave town for a vacation, even for a long weekend, because they may lose power and or flood. Number 5, when I speak at a city council meeting, I will be challenged by the mayor at almost precisely the 3-minute mark to wrap it up, while others will speak much longer before being challenged, or won't be challenged at all, and will be allowed to complete their entire 4-minute and 40-second monologue. Rhetorical question to self. I wonder how long the 4-minute, 40-second person could have spoken before being challenged. 5 minutes? 5 minutes, 30 seconds? 6 minutes? Number 6, the Jackson and Sailor Sanitary Sewer Lift Station was fully operational during the flood, according to city management and Christopher B. Burke Engineering. Primary note to self. This means that the city has a much bigger, almost insurmountable problem in that neighborhood than if the station had not been functional throughout the flood. Secondary note to self. Most citizens, ordinary people, consider fully functional to mean that a station is pumping sewage out of their neighborhood and that raw sanitary sewage is not backing up into their basements and into their streets. Tertiary note to self, my block, the 300 block of Geneva Avenue at East End Park, is not anywhere near the Jackson and Sailor Station. There is no indication that that the city is evaluating the repeated flooding that occurs on the 300 block of Geneva Avenue. A rhetorical question to self, do I want to wait around for the next time? It will be the fourth time sewage backs up in my home within 2 years. Number 7, I recently incurred expenses related to incorporation of a new business within Elmhurst with intent to lease office space in Elmhurst and hire employees. I will now need to incur additional expense to move my company headquarters to Oakbrook Terrace, where they have been doing a great job, I've done the research, of upgrading infrastructure commensurate with residential and commercial growth. Interesting tangent. Right before the flood, I inquired with Inland Real Estate regarding leasing retail space in Elmhurst. There is a sign at the location instructing would-be tenants to contact Inland. Inland never got back to me, so I followed up after the flood and after my vocal participation in the meetings of July 26th and August 2nd. I was informed that I would need to contact a specific individual at City Hall regarding leasing that space. I decided to move my business to Oakbrook Terrace. I don't have time to play Elmhurst politics. Virtually all city management and city government communication, this is number 8, virtually all city management and city government communication regarding the recent flooding events in Elmhurst, there have been at least 5 in the last 2 years, 5 flooding events in the last 2 years within the city limits of Elmhurst, has been defensive, both in letter and in spirit. Note to self, there is no indication that anybody in city management or city government, meaning elected officials, acknowledges that even 5 to 10 years ago, rains of these magnitudes did not cause severe flooding, cause the severe flooding that more recent storms have caused. Rhetorical question to self. If nothing has changed, then why would we now have a stormwater tax on the table in Elmhurst? And why did City Manager Borchert say, if you're contributing more stormwater, you pay more? Elmhurst doesn't do that now, maybe we should. Number 9, City Manager Borchert indicates Elmhurst design is for storms from 5 to 10-year frequency. Storms above this frequency will result in system capacity being exceeded and backups. The Elmhurst design capacity is a typical design for sewers in Elmhurst. Rhetorical questions to self. If nothing has changed and Elmhurst's design is up to date as implied, and we have adequate storm and sanitary sewer systems, then why should we do anything? Why should we have a task force? Why should we have a storm tax? Why should we have a new comprehensive sewer improvement plan? We're already broke, so why should we spend the money on these things when, statistically speaking, based upon the laws of averages, we probably won't have another 100-year storm in the next 500 years, given the fact that we've had several in the past few years. Number 10, I did not waste the money that I spent to send my son to the Sam Fox School of Architecture, Landscape, and Urban Design at Washington University in St. Louis. When home for the summer of 2008, between his sophomore and junior years, he said to me, when I was in high school in Elmhurst, growing up in Elmhurst, I used to think that Elmhurst was up and coming, but now I look around and all I see is a recipe for disaster. He said that in 2008. If only I had believed him, my son, enough to move out of Elmhurst before experiencing sanitary sewage backups 3 times in 1.5 years. Written by my son right after the flood. The recent flooding that has devastated much of our residents' real and personal property has been an unfortunate event, to say the least. The overwhelming force of water has time and time again devastated areas of Elmhurst which have consistently been unable to deal with this type of natural and man-made disaster. Rather than the reactionary or usual contrived solutions which can originate from town hall-style meetings such as the one held yesterday evening, Monday, July 26th, that's when remember when he wrote this, at Bryan Middle School, this most recent Elmhurst flooding affords us the unique opportunity to carefully consider pragmatic solutions for sustainable solutions to water management in our community. For example, suggestions for constructing a parking lot within East End Park would fall into this reactionary category. Not only would such a project degrade green space within the park that has been enjoyed by so many, but an impermeable parking surface would certainly add to water management problems in the surrounding neighborhood, not resolve any. The most effective solution is to celebrate the awesome power of water and enjoy water's natural benefits rather than hide water in an effort to chart an unnatural, unbalanced, and unsound course for water flow. Professionals who understand the unique ecological impacts of water on a biosystem and its corresponding built environment must be consulted if we are to have any hope of reaching sustainable solutions for our community. In my time studying architecture, landscape, and urban design at Washington University in St. Louis, one of the most highly ranked universities in this area of study, I was fortunate enough to be educated by such individuals that possess this knowledge and expertise, and would be more than happy to participate on any advisory council and or contact experts from WashU to solicit their participation. I hope that no long-term solution will be seriously considered before consulting forward-thinking experts on the subject. Number 11, the 300 block of Geneva Avenue is a de facto City of Elmhurst stormwater retention pond that extends into East End Park. The 300 block of Geneva Avenue must fill up with water before it will spill in flash flood fashion, mostly between my house and my neighbor to the north, into East End Park. When the flood waters recede from East End Park, they will spill in flash flood fashion back into the 300 block of Geneva Avenue, mostly between my house, again coming out the way the waters went in, mostly between my house and my neighbor to the north. Number 12, City Manager Borchert outlined 4 priority 1 action items in a memorandum dated August 3rd, 2010. When I worked in upper middle management at a Fortune 500 corporation, I was accountable to communicate measurable results of priority 1 action items assigned to me. Rhetorical questions to self. What specific accomplishments have city management reported and or documented regarding the following? A, collaborating and coordinating all city resources toward early resolution with Commonwealth Edison as a plan of action for reinforcements as appropriate to the power grids that support city facilities and the Elmhurst community. B, continuing to review and evaluate the City of Elmhurst storm and sanitary systems and capacities relative to recent rainfall events which significantly exceeded design capacity, and determine how best to provide protection for public and private facilities going forward. C, evaluate designs and possible cost sharings to assist in expediting installations of private property, overhead sewers, and other private property flood protection enhancement features, including potential zoning relief systems as necessary or appropriate. D, work with private property owners in a coordinated fashion with elected officials and possible task force members relative to above to develop public and private action plans going forward for improvements. Those, what I just read, were the 4 priority 1 action items identified by city management and published. You can find it on the City of Elmhurst website. Note to self, these priority 1 action items are so poorly written and vague, not measurable, in other words, that they would be rejected as not measurable at most corporations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next, we have Ellen Cruz, 868 Sailor.
Hi, good evening. I know that the council's looking into all the aspects of the flooding, and we really do appreciate your hard work. It's an overwhelming task, and it's very gratifying to see that everyone's working so hard on it. But in checking into all the aspects of the flooding, we do need to have something very important checked on more thoroughly. In respect to Dr. Burke's in-depth assessment of the Jackson Sailor pumping station, we need to ask him how exactly he determined that that city worker entered the building and pressed the sewer override button at 1:30 in the morning. He did state this in his conclusions, but he did not share the actual evidence that he found in his investigation, which led him to this conclusion. We need to know if this actually occurred, especially if we're looking into making improvements to any of these pumping stations. We need to know if someone actually went in there and pressed that button and how he found that out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Darlene Heslop, 200 North Michigan, number 227. Okay, thank you. And last on our list is Kathleen Sullivan, 133 Pine. Oh, I'm sorry. You did. I'm sorry. Kristen Morrow, 691 Washington.
Hi, my name is Kristen Morrow, and I am from 691 Washington Street. And the reason that I'm here at this meeting is so hopefully you won't forget about Washington Street and our needs. I just want to recap a little bit. On June 20, my husband and I bought our dream home at 691 Washington Street in September. On June 23rd, we received 10 feet of water that destroyed our finished basement. We put in glass block windows and concrete barriers. And then on July 23rd into the 24th, we received another 10 feet of water, making our total losses at $100,000, financially devastating. This week, we had a waterproofing specialist come into our home. He looked at me and said, "This is a city problem. There's nothing I can do for you." I have 2 small children. I do not feel safe in my home any longer. I have to hire a babysitter to watch my residents so I can travel with my family. I'm just wondering if there's an engineer here that can offer any ideas of things we can do to make our homes safe while this investigation is taking place. I also have heard about cameras going underground on Washington Street to check on our sewer system. Our street does not drain, and that is the problem. This is nothing that overhead sewers can solve. So please, when you are making decisions regarding these investigations, make Washington Street a priority. We have a wonderful, wonderful block of people who love our homes, we love our families, and we would like to be safe in Elmhurst. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We care about Washington Street, so we definitely have you on our radar. We thank you.
Kathleen Sullivan, 133 Pine.
Kathleen Sullivan, 133 Pine Street, Elmhurst resident since 1970. And Washington Street, the block Kristen lives on, I looked at 3 houses on her block at the same time, so I figure it was just someone's plan for me to be in a big giant puddle that day. I want to thank you for having this meeting today. If we're in business and we have a big crisis to solve, we go and have extra meetings, and so I appreciate you guys having an extra meeting to discuss the comprehensive plan, which I really am in favor of having a comprehensive plan before we do things in a holistic solution. I am for doing things that take water out of the system right now. If you want to put moratoriums on things, such as adding additional sump pumps or whatever, I'm all for that. I am against overhead sewers at this time because they will add sump water to the system. Each one that you add, you'll be putting the sewage upstairs, but you will add a sump pump, and so that each one of those adds water to the system, and the 8 inches that was between my first floor and my basement is the difference that could happen if you add those to my home. And I just don't know how many floods that we'll be able to go through and stay in our home. We'll just leave town. And again, I've been here since 1970. Also, with the other thing that I know when I listened to some of the discussions, it's that several people said that they've worked with Dr. Burke, and since they're not here, someone can convey this to them. And I would like to hear, if we do hire him, I would like a full disclosure of what their conflicts of interest are. How much money does their firm make from their work with Dr. Burke? How much money do they pay Dr. Burke if instead they hire him? What is the nature of their business with Dr. Burke? How do they have that? So are they, if they're a litigator, if they're a law firm, do they litigate for Dr. Burke? Does he instead serve as an expert witness for them? Do they do employment attorney stuff for him? What is it that they do? I would like each person who already had a business relationship with him to disclose that, as well as any of the other engineers that you consider, because I think that that's important as well. And each time I hear it, it kind of, I think they're saying it because they have confidence in him and his abilities, and maybe that's correct, but I would just like to understand, again, the nature of that to make sure it's not something else. So those are my points for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miss.
That concludes public forum.
Thank you, Clerk Spencer. I will now go on to a city manager Borchert status report. If we could refer to our city manager Borchert, who's got some overheads and some recent results, comparisons to past experiences, et cetera, which I think are going to be enlightening. So, City Manager Borchert, if you could take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. And Dr. Burke did have an early evening conflict, but he has arrived, and I will, understanding that, certainly move through a short report for the City Council and community, and allow for a transition to review the Burke Engineering Interim Agreement proposal, and then move on to the discussion about the comprehensive plan. Certainly, the city staff has not been waiting for the comprehensive plan to be agreed to and for a consultant to be hired to do work. As has been mentioned in public forum, a early report was identified by the city staff. It's on the city website. It's identified priority 1 items and priority 2 items. In that regard, city staff has had numerous conversations with Commonwealth Edison. We have yet reached a point with Commonwealth Edison that we can provide any options for the community to consider or report any commitments from Commonwealth Edison. I can report that Commonwealth Edison has provided, I believe, a real sincere interest to deal with the issues that they have been made much more aware of. They were at our meeting, and they are aware of that and have committed to work with the city staff and the council at the appropriate time. We're moving that as quickly forward as we possibly can. Staff continues to evaluate city systems. There's been a number of sewers that have been televised in the most hard-hit areas to make sure that the systems are not obstructed in any fashion. We're investigating those sanitary sewers and storm sewers in a methodical fashion, keeping tracks of those. All of that information will be forwarded to the Burke firm if they are retained in the interim, and will certainly information forwarded to the comprehensive plan consultant when that firm is brought on board. Relative to private property enhancement, it remains a city staff recommendation that the past practice of providing an incentive for sanitary sewer improvements through the installation of an overhead system be allowed to go forward in a reasonable fashion. We've made a recommendation that $450,000 be allocated from the current infrastructure investment effort of doing work on the collection system, allow for $450,000 to be directed toward the private property enhancement, which provides a number of positives and provides for improvements where they're requested on the private side to be made while the home is being returned to a reasonable working quality of life level because of the damage they've sustained. So it would be best to allow that repair to go forward at the same time. Mr. Burke, Dr. Burke will I'm sure be able to explain a little more than I relative to the pros and the cons of that recommendation. Staff position is there's far more positives associated with that than any of the negatives, and it is it's like working with Commonwealth Edison. We don't need to get a comprehensive plan approved to know that we need to get the best darn electrical grid system to support the community. We're going to move forward in that. We believe that the positives relative to the overhead sewer system are such that we could move forward. That's going to be part of the comprehensive plan. We have made on the city, between the manager's office and public works office and the engineer's office, over 400 contacts with folks representing 400 addresses in the community. 80 of those have the issue of the overhead sewers. The other 320 have a combination of other issues. So we are working on a one-on-one basis with Elmhurst homeowners to provide information to allow good decisions to be made by the homeowners, and to allow city staff to have information that we can then pull together towards development of a review of opportunities for the council to consider at the appropriate time as to where the best benefits are and the best benefit cost ratios are. This information has been identified, trying to do updates on the city website. This is the home page of the city website. We do have on the far right side the ability to click on for storm flood information. There's a lot of information there. Did that wrong. Various flood information is available. The frequently asked questions. We're preparing some summary of the next level of frequently asked questions. We'll be posting those within the next week to 2 weeks with answers to those questions that are, again, continuing to come in through the contacts that city staff has made. A lot of questions have, as we've heard even this evening, centered around the storms that we experience and the nomenclature of a 100-year event. Technically, those things are more appropriately referred to as a 100-year event is an event that has the chance of occurring of 1%. The Elmhurst system is designed to a 10-year event return frequency. This linear graph represents various storms: 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 year. 10 year is the design standard in Elmhurst, and that standard was identified back when Elmhurst converted from a combined sewer to a separate system. Since that time in the 1960s, the state's recommended guidelines for frequency of rain events has changed, making some of the Elmhurst system not quite 10-year because the intensity of rainfalls have increased, making the Elmhurst system that was built in the 60s and basically the 60s to a 10-year standard then, a little off from what a 10-year standard would be if it built today. You can see the incredible events that Elmhurst has, and in the region has had to go through. The August 87 is up at the top. The pointer works a little bit at least. Way up there is the August 87 event. That event in 87 then led to a lot of work for the Elmhurst community. The Elmhurst community responded to that. The council responded to that. There was financing identified, action plans identified, and a lot of work was done. More recently, the September 08 event, just under a 100-year event, and then the two events that really has rocked our community, rocked our city staff, rocked me, rocked everybody. Whether you got flooding or didn't get flooding, you know somebody that got flooding. Both those events are over the 100-year curve, or the 1% curve. The 4.5 inches in 30 minutes, and then the 7.5 inches in 6 hours. Way over the 100-year event. So I think we have to recognize there needs to be an expectation of the community for the community's infrastructure, and an expectation that the city staff maintains that infrastructure. I believe the city staff has maintained that infrastructure. I believe the city councils have made good decisions relative to the standards of infrastructure for the community. Now, what do we do as a community when we have events that far surpass the system's capacity? I believe we need to provide information on how to respond and how to react, keep records as to where the more vulnerable areas are of the community, and then perhaps put in place additional means to allow the public side to help the private side protect themselves so that their property is able to be the high quality home that they deserve to have and want to have. That's why we've made the recommendation that the current program policy of providing assistance to overhead sewer installations, where you go through the proper criteria, qualifications and criteria, be perhaps considered for additional flood enhancement measures, not just for sanitary sewer flood enhancement, but also for stormwater flood enhancement. That's what we're working for, and I think it's important to understand what the Elmhurst system was designed to do and what we've recently experienced. After the 87 flood, which did result in 87 of Salt Creek being in the Elmhurst community for 3 weeks, part of the action plan of the community was to not allow, by virtue of a project to be determined, Salt Creek from flooding into Elmhurst. And Elmhurst was the only community receiving a permit from the state of Illinois with collaboration from the county of DuPage to provide such a flood control structure. And Elmhurst was permitted to build a flood control, Salt Creek flood control berm and balancing flood mitigation comp storage basin. Elmhurst has been maintaining that levee since Katrina occurred. FEMA was self-imposing new standards on flood control structures and mandated across the country that flood control structures need to be certified. Elmhurst is proceeding with certifying the Elmhurst berm project. You know, if it could have been at a worse time, I don't know when it would have been, but we're in the middle of this certification process, doing some work on the berm to get the certification, and this series of rainfall events occurred that would have, had that berm been left in an unrestored capacity. You can see the elevation of the creek to the left. That's Salt Creek to the left. To the right is the rear of the homes on Hawthorne Avenue north of Harrison. Salt Creek would have come into the Elmhurst community like it did in '87, but the plan to provide Salt Creek flood protection, in fact, worked. What hasn't been put in place is private property protection for the stormwater that rolls off the city's streets, city's private properties, and flows over land when the sewer is full to lowland areas. And that's what we need to study it from my perspective, and I understand the community, what the community is looking for, help in that regard. Dr. Burke and his firm will provide, I believe, great guidance for the interim, and will help provide the document needed to bring on a USA class expert for the Chicago metro region to help the Elmhurst community identify options and alternatives for then the council to consider implementing. Basically, that's a short report. We're continuing again to work on the addresses and homes that are brought to the city's attention. We'll continue to do that, provide information as best we can, the information that needs to be brought forward to Dr. Burke's attention, and then on to the next consulting engineer we'll be gathering. And we've made notes from folks that have spoke this evening. Those addresses the clerk has, those will be recorded and be made part of our city analysis and passed on again to the consultant for their analysis. I take any questions, but believe it would be appropriate to then review the Burke Engineering interim agreement. Council received that with a transmittal letter from the manager. Manager's position would be, staff has reviewed it. We believe the several points that Dr. Burke has identified are appropriate points to be covered. The fee schedule is standard. The practice would be for the council to tune that up with questions or concerns. Dr. Burke is here, and when it's in appropriate final condition, Don Storino, the Storinos, the legal offices would take that proposal, turn it into a contract document, and then put an ordinance on it, presumably for the city council to consider the next council meeting, which would be a week from tomorrow, with Labor Day a week from today being a holiday. The Monday meeting pushes to Tuesday night. So it'd be our plan and be my staff recommendation that we discuss, perhaps Dr. Burke could do an overview of his proposal, discuss that, and allow staff to work with the attorney and Dr. Burke to put it in form for your consideration and approval a week from tomorrow.
Thank you, City Manager Borchert. And with that, and we have Dr. Burke in the audience, I'd like to actually turn this over to Dr. Burke. Dr. Burke, if you take the podium to my right and maybe give us an overview of your proposal, that would be terrific. Thank you, Dr. Burke. And as Mr. Borchert mentioned, the advantage we have at this special meeting is if we come to consensus, we hopefully can retain Mr. Burke as our interim, and which we could actually have City Attorney Storino draw up a regular contract from the city to our contract engineer if this were to happen, which would be on the agenda for September 7th. So, Mr. Burke, if you'd be good enough to introduce yourself once again and go through your proposal. We'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. The proposal, as we presented it, included a series of tasks. The first one is simply the data collection. There's ongoing data that is necessary, and we're finding out. I know the staff is finding out things. Residents are providing information and trying to focus in on all the areas that we're flooding. So that's just one of the tasks, which is data collection. The next task includes a series of workshops. It became apparent to me from the input that the alderman provided that there was various levels of understanding relative to how the sanitary sewer, the storm sewer, how Salt Creek, and how the overall, even the wastewater treatment plant works. Wastewater treatment plant, as you know, is a recipient of the wastewater that you generate. And during wet weather, it becomes overtaxed, and there are certain things that need to be considered as you move forward with looking at solutions. It cannot continuously take wet weather flow for a variety of reasons that we'll discuss. But what I did is break up the that task into a series of workshops. We estimated that those would be about an hour in duration. We would prepare the documents related to each one of these areas with detailed visuals and give it to you a week before the workshop so you can review it at your leisure. Be prepared to listen to the presentation, of course, ask questions as to what this is all about. And as an example, on the sanitary sewer, what is starting at the house and moving all the way down through the lift stations, understanding, and many of you know, but understanding what the various components that we've been talking about, everything from the overhead sewer versus the gravity sewer versus ejector pumps versus sump pumps, and going forward and looking at the sewer lining, what that does, what it looks like, how it's done, things like that, and give you, because it appeared to me from the comments that I heard at the various meetings that there was various degrees of understanding about these components. And that's really what we focused on. We suggested that one of the last workshops, number 4, take place at the wastewater treatment plant. That's where you can view the SCADA system. That's where you can view, many of you may be familiar with what a common neuter is, or a bar screen, or settling basins, or other appurtenances, but it's important to understand that those are real things that limit what can or cannot be done and why they're important. And then the task 3 that we prepared was in response to a conversation we had with Mike Hughes and Mike Kopp regarding some possible alternatives that they would like to have detailed engineering performed on, not detailed, preliminary engineering performed on in the short term to see if some of those options are viable and things that could be done. Some of the residents were asking about things to be done at Saylor and Jackson to see if there were measures that could be put into place, and that task would include assignments from the city staff to move a concept to a preliminary engineering stage. Obviously, we also included attendance at various meetings that would be making presentations here, as well as assistance with the preparation of the RFQ, because that was one of the items that was discussed at one of the city council or committee of the whole meetings. So that pretty much summarizes the material that's included in the proposal.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Burke. And this time I'm going to open it up to the council if there's questions or discussion. I know we've got Alderman Otis hand up already. Alderman Mulliner.
Yeah, I have a series of questions that revolve around this. I understand where you were going with this and the concept of having an interim to assist us as we were moving forward with the RFQ. My first question is the dollar amount that we're dealing with here, this $34,500. Does this include all of the work that you've previously done? That's my first question. My second question is, I'm assuming that if you select a different firm, all of the data that you collect will be shared with any other firm that's coming in. One of the big things that we were really requesting was the development of an RFQ, and when I read task number 5, the task that I see says request an RFQ to address the flooding problems in the city of Elmhurst. What we were requesting was assistance in the development of an RFQ to select an engineer. That's not what this says. This is clearly not what I was looking for with the request for the RFQ. So that's one of the things that I'm interested in. I know I'm jumping around a little bit, and I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. Attendance in the meetings, I know that you've been attending a series of ward meetings that are going on. I want to know if that's part of the billing that we're dealing with here. And then the last question is kind of a city staff question, and that is that I see this whole education component of presentation of workshops, et cetera. My intention was that I was hoping that city staff would put that presentation together for us. I assume the city staff has all of that information, understands how that system works. That's $15,000 worth of this proposal, and I kind of wanted city staff to explain to the public how to do it rather than having an engineering firm come in and tell us how, learning the system and then telling us how it works. I'd rather have the city staff tell us, and then after we hire a firm to do the final evaluation to determine whether there's issues within that environment. Just a couple of questions that I had.
Okay, the answer to your first question regarding the previous work was no, it is not included. Second question was whether or not the material we developed would be available for another consultant. The answer is yes. Whether or not we had sufficient hours in for the RFQ, the answer is yes. There are certain components of the project that we understand that would, based on certainly listening to your comments regarding what you were looking to have included in a overall master plan, and so we have pulled together some proposals that others have prepared, and we would be utilizing those and giving that to staff as a template to pursue that. I don't know if the other question regarding the presentation is something that you want me to answer or not, but I can tell you that the material that we're talking about is not something that you're going to be pulling off the shelf. It's not something that I'm not going to present a couple slides about what your atlas looks like or anything like that. But that's I don't know if that's a question I should be answering.
Follow up on that on two things. One is then one of my concerns is what is the bill that we've got to date? That's number one. Number two is going back to the workshops. My concept behind that workshop was to get a general understanding of how the system works, that I'm assuming the city staff understands how the system works. I know they do. They've been running the system for a long time, and I just want them to explain to us and the public how the staff works, how the system works. And that's the reason why, once again, I like to do these as committee of the whole meetings, because it's on television and people can see it who cannot attend. And I'm very interested in having city staff come in and tell us how that system works, not necessarily have somebody come in and tell us, here's how a system designed properly is going to function, or going through our process and looking at our whole system and figuring out how it works. I know that staff understands how it works. They can simplify it. They've done this type of work for us in the past. It's not anything that's outstanding work that they have to spend a lot of time on. They understand how the system works. They should be able to explain it to the public and explain it to us how it works. We don't want to get into every detail. That's not our issue. Our issue is what is the system and how does it work? Where are the basins? Where does the water flow? We want to understand those concepts. We don't want to understand every single detail. I don't want to understand every piece of plumbing. I want to understand just the concepts of how it's supposed to work. And at the same time understand why they saw the flooding in the areas that they saw the flooding in. And, part of understanding where they're seeing the flooding occurring is that we keep focusing on these 3 or 4 floods that we've had. And yes, these are devastating floods, but there's certain areas in town that flood even when we don't have these 5- and 6-inch rains. And we need to address why those are occurring, and that's the reason why I really think staff needs to kind of give us their vision of what's going on before we ask an engineer to come in and tell us, here's what we see. I think staff needs to tell us what's going on first, and that's really what I was kind of, I've been saying this, and that's what I keep hoping that we're going to have staff come in and do a presentation for us on how the system's supposed to work. And so that we have a high-level view and understanding of how the system works, and I'm not seeing that come forward. And that's really what I'm looking for, because I think that's the first step that we need to understand up here. And I think it's also the first step that the public needs to understand as we move forward with this process, because if we're going to end up with a project down the road, and I don't know if we are, if we're going to end up with a large project that we're going to have to do here, I think everybody needs to understand what this is going to do for us, and also if there's reasons that we can't do it. And we know that there's certain things that we can and can't do based on the regional areas, so we need to understand those things, and I know staff has the answers to those questions, and I don't. Personally, when we're in such a tight budget crunch, I can't justify having a $15,000 expenditure to do the workshops when I know staff can do it for us. So.
Anybody else? Alderman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Alderman Mulliner was looking over my shoulder on some of the notes that I've already taken. I agree wholeheartedly with Alderman Mulliner, especially in regards to the education. I was actually hoping that this committee of the whole would be the kickoff of the start of the education process for the city council, as well as the general Elmhurst residents. I think part of it being a budget issue, $15,000 when we have the expertise. You know, we've heard Director Hughes stand up and speak to us on how many years, and I won't quote it, Mike, how many years he's been with the city of Elmhurst. With that expertise in-house, I would think that wealth of knowledge would be shared with the city council. Ultimately, task force or no task force, we as a city council, we as an elected body need to make that final decision. And without that education process before us, I find it hard to make any type of decision. Now, as Alderman Pezza has mentioned in the past, I am an engineer, unlike Alderman Pezza. So that is the process that I value. I value education and data behind the decisions that we make. Without that, we're kind of shooting in the dark here. And no offense to Dr. Burke, I think his qualifications have, as he's distributed in past meetings, speak for themselves. I think that he's very educated, especially in this area. But you know, you gotta crawl before you walk, and the crawling part right now is the education process, and we don't have that education process as a full city council. I know a lot more than I ever thought I would know about the Saylor and Jackson sanitary basin. I'll probably even know more in the upcoming months. But I think that's key. So in regards to kind of bringing it full circle here, in regards to this proposal, you know, my recommendation would be to have city staff take over, you know, starting next week, even if at all possible, the presentations, the workshops that are duly noted here. I think what I'm looking for in regards to an engineering firm to help assist the city of Elmhurst is really here's where we're at today. What do we need to get at X position tomorrow? And that's going to take, you know, the collection of data that the city of Elmhurst, I would believe, either has or is collecting today, but then the simulation models that our Elmhurst engineering staff either does not have the tools or the time frame or both to be able to do. So we need that modeling. We need that simulation to say, here's our capacity. The capacity might be sufficient, and it might just be infiltration. The sanitary lift stations might be appropriate, but it might be something else. It might be the force main. There's been a lot of things thrown out there, but that education piece is what I want to start crawling in that direction ASAP. Myself and a few other aldermen have requested this meeting tonight. The reason being is myself and others have said that we will work on this issue every week possible until we have some type of resolution. I truly stand behind those words, and I think we need to start, and my recommendation to the full city council would be to start the education process by city staff, and therefore striking it from this proposal starting next week. In regards to the RFQ, I'd also like to reaffirm some of the statements that Alderman Mulliner has stated in that I would like the Burke engineering firm to assist us with pulling together the RFQ. I think that we need, if we haven't started on that already, we need to start on that as well in parallel. The only other thing that I have a little bit of concern about over this proposal, to me it's a little bit vague, but task number 3, the evaluation of possible alternatives, albeit a good direction to go, I'm not sure if we're putting the cart before the horse here, because we're asking an engineering firm to do some evaluations of some sanitary possible solutions before we really know what the problem is. Maybe we spend our money on the infiltration issue, which I strongly believe is the issue. But with that said, I don't have any problem due to looking at the cost and possible benefit of moving forward with Task 3. So my recommendation, I don't know if we, City Attorney, may I ask, do we need to make a motion on this, or is this just pure discussion today to make any amendments?
At the end of, I think, your discussion, probably a motion to move it to the board or to the city council.
For any revisions, though, do we need to make any amendments?
And the revisions that come out of this discussion will be made. And it has to be turned into a contract, too, as both staff and Dr. Burke have said.
Okay, thank you. So I'll have further discussion on that topic, but I strongly back Alderman Mulliner in regards to having staff start presentation or workshops for the full city council and the residents. And I hope my fellow aldermen at the dais will support that as well.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Shea?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also agree with Alderman Bram and Alderman Mulliner. I was kind of surprised. I thought for task number 5, I thought that was what we discussed, that we wanted him to, Mr. Burke, on the RFQ. So I'd like to have it say, not if requested, that he will be working with the city staff to develop the RFQ.
Very good. Anything else?
No, everything was already answered and suggested.
Thank you. Alderman Pezza? Oh, Alderman Gutenkopf.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually have 2 questions. Like some of the other aldermen have indicated, I'm concerned about spending $15,000 for the 4 workshops because it works out to $37.50 each, which I understand is going to take a lot of your staffing and time. And what I don't understand is what that you would provide that would be different than what our staff are capable of doing, because these sound from your proposal like summary of existing information. So I have 2 questions. That's my first question is, could you explain to me how this would be different and would enhance our understanding that might be something other than what our staff is capable of doing?
Well, first of all, you have a very qualified and talented staff. All right. So what and what their availability is to prepare this document, only they can answer. But let me start out by describing what it was going to be for a given component here, and that's a sanitary sewer. Because I've listened to, even though I mean I've sat here so far probably for about 5 hours of talking about sanitary sewer issues, and I don't know if there has been any, I mean, it's been 5 hours talking about that. It's still at a concept level, that we have not gone into any discussion as to what rates of infiltration can be removed by different strategies, what are the factors that go into how much groundwater you get from a broken line compared to all these other components that we're looking at. I think some of the people recognize when we discussed the sanitary sewer lateral, but I'm not so sure that everybody in the at the dais or in the audience understand what the sanitary sewer lateral. But all these things are not trivial or meaningless or just concepts. They all add up and result in you going from about 5 MGD to as much as 100 MGD. When we start talking about the sanitary sewer in this workshop, we'll be focusing on the upcoming regulations that are going to drive some of the solutions that you pursue. Those are very important concepts. You right now pump the wastewater into the storm sewer system. There are pending regulations that will severely restrict those. So strategies that you're going to develop as a elected group need to be short-term as well as long-term and understand the ramifications. Marching all the way to the lift stations, through the lift stations, I'm sure everybody knows where the interceptors go, but how they get to the wastewater treatment plant and the ramifications of you pumping things 2-3 times, all those things were methodically going to be presented in a packet of information. I think as an example, we could talk about the flood control. It's pretty clear to me from discussions I've had that not everybody knows about how Salt Creek watershed works, how the number of flood control projects work, where Salt Creek actually originates and where it doesn't. So on that particular subject, starting out in and not any technical terms, although if you want to start talking about hydraulic simulation models and the like, that's what I teach and use on a daily basis, so I'll be happy to do that. However, my point in discussing what the basis of the Salt Creek flood control measures, starting all the way up in upper parts of Cook County, going all the way down here. So when people say, why wasn't the quarry working? Why didn't it work? Why didn't something else work? And I saw that empty. Being able to answer those questions and allowing you to answer those types of questions. And so that's the kind of information that I was going to include in the workshops.
Alderman Gutenkauf, follow up?
Yeah, I have a second question, but then I'd like to come back and ask staff to talk about why this assistance is important to them and what knowledge that Dr. Burke brings that we don't have in-house. So I think that'll be an important component of this, but as long as Dr. Burke's here, if I may, I have another question for him. Mm-hmm. And my second question involves Task 3. And as I read Task 3, it seems like this is an attempt to help us come up with some alternative solutions before we've gone into the RFQ process. My understanding of the RFQ process was that that would allow us to identify engineering firms that would do Task 3. So am I misunderstanding what Task 3 is represented in your report, or are we perhaps attempting to identify alternatives before we've done what we really think we need to do, which would be to identify a firm to help us get there?
No, these are separate and independent items that were requested to be done in the interim, and I gave some examples. One of the concepts was to make sure, as you recall, our discussions about the force main that goes to the north, leaving the Sailor and Jackson lift station. We talked about, you had programmed that as a capital improvement for next year. Looking at whether or not it made sense to increase that size of that lift station in the short term so you can get some relief in that area rather than waiting till someone figures out later on what it's all about, the Sailor and Jackson lift station. Being able to take the information that we had already developed and look at things beyond a concept level and doing the preliminary engineering, as I said, in a more expeditious manner while you're waiting for the RFQ process to move forward.
So, if I may, Task 3, as you've outlined it here, would help us identify things that we could do immediately that might be cost-effective, give us some relief, but rather than having to wait until we've got the comprehensive plan, there are things that won't necessarily, would have changed in the comprehensive plan?
Looking at specific projects like the one I just described that the staff have identified that they would like to move forward on doing preliminary engineering versus sitting around waiting till you had someone online. Specific projects, and I gave you the 3 examples there. These are not things, these are doing the preliminary engineering on these concepts that they have been discussed in this room already.
Thank you, Dr. Burke. City Manager Borchert, with a hand.
If I may, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And in response to some of the alderman's questions, and in particular Alderman Gutenkauf, relative to the Burke proposal for workshop versus city staff providing workshop, I do believe city staff can do a very, very thorough and complete job of explaining how the storm system works in Elmhurst, sanitary system works in Elmhurst, the lift stations, the wastewater treatment plant, and then various Salt Creek flood control operations that the city staff is aware of and involved with and familiar with. But I do believe that it's necessary to have an outside consultant identify and affirm and possibly correct city staff on some items. I think it's going to be much more affirmation than correction, but it's important, I believe, for the community to get an outside perspective. It's clear to me that there was a desire that there be a independent look at, and maybe there's a way to allow the city staff to explain how everything works from the staff perspective. We can collaborate and coordinate that with the Burke firm, and then allow the Burke folks to take that level to a higher level of understanding. I think it's critical that we understand the limitations of improvements, even in the improvements that the city staff has identified as possible improvements to the city system. Dr. Burke has identified them from a Burke proposal under Task 3 to evaluate from a consultant perspective for then consideration going forward. There will be limitations to those improvements. I think it's critical that the community and the council understand what the limitations of those improvements are. In nearly all cases, they will not be complete solutions. There will be an event and a situation, a rainfall, a capacity situation that will overtake these improvements. So I think we need to be clear about what possible improvements are, what the limitations of those improvements are, and then get into a discussion of, and this happened after the 87 event and the various HARSA consultant comprehensive planning components got into then an evaluation of what's the improvement, what's the limits of the improvement, is that a good improvement for the city to undertake, yes or no? If no, what's then left as a potential risk, and what do we do as a community or as an individual property owner relative to that risk? That's what I value the Burke firm to assist in our educational workshop format, but maybe there's some way that we could reduce the possible scope of work by Burke by half to allow the city staff to do that half and allow Burke to do the other half, is a suggestion.
Yes. Alderman Rose, and we'll go to Alderman Morley.
Thank you, Your Honor. I do have just one or two questions and then some comments on this. These workshops that you are proposing, are you designing them to be open to the public, or are you designing them to be just for the aldermen? What was your thinking in that?
Open to the public.
So the questions to be taken, would those be from aldermen or from members of the community?
I presume both.
Okay. I have a couple comments to make on this. Again, unlike Alderman Bram and perhaps some other folks, I am not an engineer, but I am a teacher. Let me just say that. I am a teacher. I look at the whole proposal, and I actually think it's great, except I have some questions about these workshops. I teach at a master's level at a university, and when I teach a course, it's very clear that there have to be prerequisites for students to understand that course. My concern with this is that we are getting an upper division course with some folks who don't have the prereqs for it. So I think that that is a waste of money for that reason. The second thing that makes a good teaching environment, when I go into a classroom, if my students haven't read their assigned readings beforehand, I can be as brilliant as possible. I can have the most beautiful PowerPoint slides you've ever seen, very logical. Doesn't make any difference. If they haven't done their homework ahead of time, it's a waste of my time. I do it. It happens to be a waste of my time to do that. So I have some concerns about that. I do think that we need to build knowledge here, but I question what the measurable objectives are going to be from these 4 workshops. If I thought that the measurable objectives were for us we would really be able to develop knowledge to create policy, and keep in mind, your job is not to create, your job is not to make me, a professor of social work, into an engineer. Your job is to give me sufficient information for me to make policy. We're a policy-making body. So I would be interested in what the measurable objectives are. It appears as if these workshops, while they're very interesting, primarily are talking about what is. I think the city manager has a really interesting idea, which is some combination of that. I think that does make some sense. I think I would suggest that I would be absolutely in favor of this. I think the task for evaluation of possible alternatives is right on target. The data collection, I'm surprised, actually that task, the fee for that is so small. I would assume that would be larger, but I could be wrong about that. I think that we need to build knowledge in a pretty simple way. The facts are the facts. How this system works is how the system works. It's facts. I've done a lot of, again, I'm not an engineer, but I can operate through the internet, and I've been I know more about sewers than I ever had hoped to learn in my life about them. And there's a lot of information out there, a lot of reading that we can do that is simplistic. But the truth is, I may not need Professor Burke to tell me this at this point. I don't have the prereqs right now. I need to have my cues give me some explanation on how the facts about how the system works. I understand some people may say, we don't trust city staff. Maybe you do or you don't. I happen to trust them quite a bit, but it's just the facts. Tell me how the system, we got the pipes, how it works, et cetera. That there is an alternative, which is we start along a workshop basis like that. We use the Burke Construction Company as a consultant in developing those workshops for us. If at some point we say we need more, we need more to build policy, then I say we can add a sub-piece to that and have a workshop on that. But I gotta tell you, I think that 4 one-hour lectures, which is what we're gonna have, questions, and if we're gonna entertain questions from the audience as well as aldermen, that will, who knows where that will go. But 4 one-hour lectures are insufficient for me to fully understand this system. We need to do some reading, and I would like to see it from city staff at that point with consultation from Burke. So it would be my recommendation is that we remove these workshops and we think about consultation in the development of workshops by staff. This is a Cadillac version. It's nice, but if I put myself in the role of one of my students, I would probably fail the quiz. Even though I attended all 4 workshops, I don't believe I would do so well in those. So I don't know that this is a prudent way to spend our money, and I would recommend we not do it that way.
Alderman Morley.
I agree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Burke, for the proposal and being here tonight. I've been reading everything I can get my hands on in great interest to try to be as educated as possible. When I talk to the people as I walk around the ward, which I did quite a bit this weekend, and I think what it boils down to for me is timing. How quickly can we get something done? Not necessarily move in a rash manner, but how quickly can we get something done? We've been here for an hour and a half, and we're talking about RFQs. I don't need to be an expert. That's what we're going to hire an expert for. I'm most interested in timing. After reading this, I think the workshops are great. Maybe it's an option at council discretion down the road. The last thing I want is Burke Engineering working on these workshops when I really want them working on a plan to stop the flooding. I think task 3 and 5 are by far the most important in this. I think there's a little confusion up here on the dais. I want to clarify it, either ask the chair or maybe get an opinion from Mr. Burke. That is, task 5, at least in my world, I run a marketing company. In my world, it's contradicting in what it says. It says, if requested, and this is what we requested, but you put it in your own words. If requested, we will work with city staff in developing the scope of services for an RFQ to address the flooding problems. To me, you've combined an RFQ with an RFP. And I don't necessarily think that's what we intended. I think a lot of people were hoping for an RFP, but we asked for an RFQ. My definition of an RFQ simply is a request for qualification. Okay? Are these people good enough? That's the way it is in my marketing world. You have to prove that you're qualified. Show me that you have the chops to come to the table and make a presentation. RFP, request for proposal. Okay? What do you propose to do to solve this issue? And I'll ask Mr. Burke, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Absolutely.
Here's my question to Mr. Burke. We're trying to get to the same solution, which is be as educated as possible, but come up with a solid plan, and how quickly are bulldozers coming in to fix whatever problems we have. So my question to you in your experience is, when communities have been faced with situations like this, obviously we want to get a qualified firm, but how quickly do we get from getting a qualified firm to a proposal? And is that something that's done in parallel, where maybe we develop an RFP and ask qualified firms to come in and give us their opinion? Just give me the roadmap, because a request for qualification doesn't get me there, and it's not what these people want to know, that we're hiring a qualified firm. They have that expectation already. So let's assume we're going to hire a qualified firm. how do we get to the meat and potatoes, which I think a lot of it is in number 3. What streets do I dig up? Where do I put a bigger sewer? Where do I detain water? Get me to that process as quickly as possible.
Okay. The RFQ was something that we discussed here at the last meeting and going through qualifications-based selection. So that's the reason why it says RFQ. So it's not a cost proposal. You narrow it down to the firms that you want to submit based on a scope of services that would be embedded in the RFQ, as an example. So you're getting them to demonstrate that they have expertise and knowledge of the types of problems that you have. The types of problems you have are exactly the ones that I have outlined in the workshops. The sanitary sewer system, the storm sewer system, limits on the wastewater treatment plant, and the already upstream flood control projects that have been done and will provide a certain level of protection. So the RFQ process is the way that I understand that you follow it, and then that would go immediately to the RFP. Being that someone would give you a detailed, based on the scope of services that everybody has prepared their qualifications to address, a price. Then the firm or firms that would be doing the work need to roll up their sleeves and start exploring reading the HARSA report, looking at the things that have already been done, and looking at the regulations that exist. And one of the things that we live in a county that has certain regulations. So as an example, someone can spend a lot of time looking at increasing the pump stations and getting you bigger pumps or parallel pumps, but without offsetting compensatory storage, meaning big holes at certain areas that are hydraulically equivalent, then you're wasting a lot of time and according, as you said, time is of the essence. So that is as an example. So what you start needing to focus on, and that is, of course, looking at the projects that have already been, if you want to get something in the ground, you start looking at the projects that perhaps were not implemented in the HARSA report, where they looked at, through a vetting process, the most viable projects, and starting to move those along. As an example, some of the stormwater projects, and if you want to get something immediately underway.
Follow up?
Alderman Morley, sure.
Thank you. A little more specific on the RFP, just in your experience. Also, you referenced the HARSA report. I think it's very important that people understand that on the city website, when was the study done?
1997 or 6?
97?
Yeah.
96, 97, there was a very comprehensive report that was done, commissioned by the city, and a lot of what we've been talking about is in here. So I would encourage the residents to go on there. But the question I have for you as it relates to this RFP. When we go to an RFP, because I know that certain engineering firms, I assume certain engineering firms will have different opinions, would it be your recommendation that we go to an RFP and we highlight the top 10 projects that we want an engineering firm to give us opinion or quote on, or would it be, in your recommendation, the best to present the problems that we have and allow, let's say, 4 or 5 engineering firms to say, here are the top 10 things you can do in priority? Do we give them the priority and tell them to hash those out, or do we stop short of that and give them the wastewater treatment, storm sewer, sanitary sewer, et cetera, and allow them to come to us? What's the most productive way and quite frankly, the most expedient way to get to a plan?
Taking the top 10 projects and having someone identify the steps necessary to, number one, figure out where it drains, the topography, the drainage areas, the time of concentrate. I'm not trying to, as Alderman Rose, I'm not trying to get professorial, but there's certain types of data. So that's what someone needs to do to get you to a conclusion whether or not you pursue project number 1, which may be a new storm sewer. And someone needs to do all that. Someone needs then to, you probably need to give them framework. I know you have to do, because someone is going to use one methodology that may not be compatible with what the agencies that are reviewing it. So I think you're going to need to spell out, if you're going to approach it that way, here are 10 projects, identify your approach to, demonstrate how you would approach these and give a approach to those. And they, but what we were talking about is, I understood last time, you were not asking for dollars in the first go-around, and have the top 3 that you selected give you dollars and pursue it that way, I think is one of the ways you were looking at it.
Final follow-up, just real quick.
Alderman Morley, feel.
I would hope we would get to a framework as quickly as possible, allowing for leeway and/or creativity with whichever engineering firms want our business and can provide solutions. As far as it relates to the workshops, I think I'll say something similar to what Alderman Rose said. I don't necessarily need to be an expert on this, and I certainly don't want to take someone else's time to make me an expert while we're going through this process. Let's get to that framework. Let's get to that RFP. Let's get city staff to help us get there as quickly as possible. And in the meantime, if we can figure out ways to get educated, whether it's with Mr. Burke or city staff, that's great. I wouldn't throw it out completely. Maybe put it as an option in the contract. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. All righty. Alderman Gutenkopf, you had a hand up. Alderman Mulliner? Oh, I apologize. Alderman Pezza, sorry.
Thanks.
Yep.
While I listened to the discussion, I think we're all on the same page, and the word that comes to my mind is efficient. And I think we all want to be as efficient as possible, both with time and dollars. And I would like to say, why can't we work simultaneously? I'd like to get this ball rolling. We need answers. I would like information. I would like the education. So if we could have staff do these workshops, get some education that way, so at least we know while Dr. Burke is working on the evaluation process, when he presents that to us, we'll have some idea as to what he's talking about. We won't be engineers, but we'll at least we'll be able to comprehend his evaluation. And at that point, when staff does the workshops, obviously we could take notes, we can ask questions, get them to Mr. Burke for answers. And I would just like to be as efficient as possible with time, money, get the ball rolling, and work simultaneously so that that can happen. Because if we do this step by step by step, that's time, that's money, and I think we could be more efficient if we worked more toward that angle. So,
thank you, Alderman. Alderman Mulliner, you had a hand up?
Yeah, basically that's what I was going to say, was that what my original thought was, and I think a number of us felt the same way, was that we have city staff do their presentation, and at the same time the engineering firm, or in this case Dr. Burke, comes through and is paying attention to what's going on, evaluates what is being said, identifies whether there's issues that are outstanding, identifies things that are down the road that maybe we're not looking at, that maybe we don't know about. You know, he brought up a very valid point today. There's new laws that are coming in for stormwater management. We need to be prepared for those, and somebody can bring that forward and help us to make sure that we're not missing something as we're doing this evaluation. So, I mean, I think we're all saying the same thing. I think this is the point where, and this is one of the reasons why it's so important, at least in my mind, that we have a meeting every week, and we do a committee of the whole meeting every week until we get through some of these things so that we get this moving. I mean, Alderman Morley clearly said it. He heard it from his ward. I've heard it from my ward. Let's get moving. We've been talking about it and talking about it. We're now a month past the last storm, and we've kind of spun our wheels for a month, and we need to get these things moving forward. Staff needs to tell us what's going on and how the systems work while the Burke firm is helping us to identify whether there's other issues, and we need to move this thing forward and get that RFP put together, RFP, RFQ, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I know we're looking for an RFQ because we want to get the qualifications first, but to me it's going to be kind of almost a combined thing. I mean, we're going to end up with a combined thing. It's just not, it's going to be kind of a blind RFP because it's not going to have dollars on it, in my mind. So I think we're moving in the same direction, but we just need to get moving is what we need to do.
Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to talk for a minute about this question of how do we proceed with the RFP component that Alderman Morley just brought up. And it seems to me that that's kind of what we're looking for with this comprehensive plan. And when I talk about, or when we discuss comprehensive planning, I envision a document that prioritizes for us what we can do and what it's going to cost us. Or perhaps it doesn't prioritize, but it matches up. Here are some of the projects you can consider. These are the costs and these are the benefits, so that we as a council, this is where the policy making comes in. We as a council look at that and we say, for $20 million we can get this, for 300 million, we can get that. This is going to affect this component, this is going to affect this component. What do you want to do? You know, what do we as a city think is the most appropriate for our town and our budget and our ability to pay for it? So that's what I see as the end process or the target of the RFQ and then the RFP. How do we find a firm that is going to have the qualifications that we need, that's going to walk us through this project to identify what exactly are our problems, what's the timeline for fixing it, and what's it going to cost? Because then the policy making comes in. Then we have the hard decisions. We've got the options laid out, these, you know, perhaps top 10 things. I don't think we say these are the top 10 things we want to do. I think we say, you know, what are the things that can be done? And then what's it going to cost us? And we have to have then the hard discussion about, well, here's in the universe of things that can be done, what's realistic for our situation? And how do we pull that off? So that's what I see as the end product of the identifying qualified firms and then asking them to give us proposals for work. So that's my expectation coming out of this. And then just one thought to add to the pool of discussion on who should be presenting workshops to us. I really like the idea of Dr. Burke consulting with our staff to make sure that their knowledge is current, especially on upcoming law changes. But I appreciate our staff's ability to update us on this kind of information. And so my preference would be what the city manager suggested, some kind of a combination, perhaps with Dr. Burke consulting with staff, but perhaps not having his team do the actual presentations for us.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Wagner is remote right now. Alderman Wagner, you would like to add anything, or I will go on to Alderman Shea. She had a hand up as well. Alderman Wagner?
Nothing from him there.
Okay. Just want to
I don't want to the process.
I understand. Thank you. Alderman Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yeah, I just wanted to go back to, like, my main concern is the RFQ. Once we get the engineer, then it's their job to assess the problems, let us know what we need, and give us, you know, like a guesstimate, approximation about how much it would cost to do whatever needs to be done. So I think that's, like, first priority. Thank you.
Very good. Alderman Rose?
Procedurally, do we need a motion? Do we have a motion already to accept this?
I would.
We don't.
We don't need a motion?
Well, no, we don't have a motion.
We don't have a motion, but I would probably entertain one shortly to move this forward.
I'll be happy to make that motion.
Okay. Alderman Rose
happy to do that.
makes a motion. We have a second by Alderman Mulliner. Alrighty, to move forward with.
What is your motion?
I am. My motion is the acceptance of the contract. Just so we lay it down there, and then I have a secondary. But then I want to make an addition to it. But just to lay it on the table, we need to make an motion.
Can I amend that motion?
No, I'm going to.
What?
Okay.
Alderman Morley?
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to put the contract on the table.
Yeah, what I would like
Discussion.
to amend is that this proposal, what we do is we remove the workshops from that. And if we want to, we can put in a certain amount for consultation up to a certain amount, which I would suggest we do. I don't know what a reasonable amount is, but it's not $15,000. And it's not, truth be told, the money that is important. It's just, I think right now it's overkill. It's not what we need. So I would suggest that we have a certain amount of money in there, and I would ask the city manager to somehow work with that to determine what that is, but the amount should not be for consultation. I would say more than about $3,000. That seems reasonable to me, but I could be wrong on that one as well. So that's my secondary motion. Do I need a second?
Okay, second that. Alderman Morley.
Well, it's a motion to amend.
My motion was to amend in that manner.
And Alderman Morley seconds that motion?
We'll support that.
Very good. Okay. Any other discussion before we call this to a vote? Alderman Shea.
I just want to make sure that for task 5, that it says about that working with the RFP instead of just if requested.
Yes.
I wanted a definite, okay.
I'll make that change. Thank you, Alderman.
Any other discussion
On this motion?
on this motion? Alderman Mulliner.
Just one comment. I mean, personally, I would shift the order of the task, because I really, truly believe that task number one is the RFQ, RFP. I just really believe that's critical. But that's okay. It doesn't matter. I'm just saying that you're writing a contract, we're not.
Alderman Rose.
I would respectfully disagree with my colleague. There you go. Data collection comes first. That's fine. That's first.
Thank you, Alderman. Okay. I ask for a roll call vote, please, on the amended motion.
Rose.
Aye.
Morley.
Aye.
Kennedy, absent. Mulliner.
Aye.
Wagner.
Alderman Wagner, your vote? Patrick, you there?
He's not on the line anymore.
Alderman, you there? Alderman Wagner? I think we've lost him.
Okay.
Oh, he's talking.
Spaceship has landed.
Alderman? Alderman Wagner? Hello? Alderman?
No, we dropped him.
Here's his phone number.
I think so.
Okay. Wagner, absent. Okay, Gudenkauf.
Aye.
Pezza.
Aye.
Shea.
Aye.
Leader.
Aye.
Bram.
Aye.
Hipskin.
Aye.
York.
Aye.
Nybo, absent. Healy, absent. Kennedy, absent. Okay, I believe we have 9 ayes, 0 nays, and
5 absent.
5 absent.
9 ayes, 0 nays, 5 absent.
Oh, no, Alderman, you're correct, just that, I got confused with the Wagner absent. Okay, I believe that is 10 ayes, 0 nays, and 4 absent.
10 ayes, 0 nays, and 4 absent. Okay. The amended motion carries. City Attorney Storino will work with staff and Dr. Burke to come up with a formal contract, which will be on the agenda for our next council meeting, which is September 7th. Alderman Mulliner?
Yeah, we've done a very good job of discussing the flooding issue. There's one piece that Mr. Borchard mentioned early on, that he's having discussions with ComEd. I think that at some point, we need to bring ComEd into the fold as well and have them as a component of this and have them come and present where they're at and what their thoughts are, because that is as big a piece, if not a bigger piece, to the flooding issue as anything else. When you saw the number of people who raised their hands at that meeting at Bryan of the generators, we have our own generating plant down there. If everybody just fire them up all at the same time, we can take over for ComEd. So I think that's a piece that we need to keep us in the loop on and have them come in and do some presentations as well, so that the whole council understands what's going on as well as the public.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Brown, you had a hand up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In regards to this, I did have additional questions, one of which is with Task 5, assistance with the RFQ. My question, and this might, a motion might actually...
Point of order, Mr. Chair, just clarification, where are we on the agenda?
Yeah, we already voted on the referral to...
We just did one amendment, I thought, and that's why I asked the question, is this a vote only on the amendment, and we could do further amendments on this? City Attorney?
I actually, the way I saw it, there was a friendly amendment to the motioner, and it was passage of the amendment in the motion. That was my observation, how I saw it. If the council sees it differently, you'd have to ask Alderman Rose and Alderman Morley, but I thought it was friendly amendments to that.
Absolutely.
To their original motion.
Right. So this motion, this issue is already voted on, and
From my perspective, we are in a committee of the whole. If there was further information that you wanted to see in the scope, that would only be helpful to me if the rest of the council agreed. So I'm happy to take, as Alderman Shea pointed out, she wanted more detail on the RFQ. I plan to work with Mr. Burke to do that. If there's something else that you'd like to see, tell me.
Okay, I will tell you then, thank you.
I'll write it down.
One of the things was on task 5 was I'd like to actually set a timeline. I don't see anything in regards to the timeline of the RFQ. We've all sat up here and talked about, moving forward with this, moving forward with it quickly, doing things in parallel. So the motion that I was considering making was to add a timeline. I wanted to ask city staff and Dr. Burke on what's appropriate, but I wanted to see a timeline of task 5.
City Manager, Alderman Rose?
The only concern I have with that is that my understanding is that we are currently talking about this agreement, and we can set a timeline. This is our agreement with this outside consultant. I would not burden that agreement with that. That's something that we can impose upon ourselves at any point to say we want it done by this amount of time. We're just asking Mr. Burke, Dr. Burke, to act as a consultant to us. So, the timeline's a good idea, but I don't know that I would include it as, my own thought would be it would be better to not have it as a motion and we just set ourselves, this is a timeline by when we want it. I think that's reasonable to think about a timeline. I don't think it relates nearly as well to this agreement. That's my only thinking about that.
I think could be looked at either way. I want to just make sure that
we get to disagree, right?
I just wanted to make sure that we're setting this as a priority and moving forward with this. And as we go into an agreement and thus a contract with this engineering firm, that it is established on what priority the RFQ does have.
Very good. So the sooner the better. 30 to 60 days, I would say, would be appropriate, or sooner. I know many of us are up here. I think it's like going for open heart surgery. We're not looking for the cheapest guy that can do a job and maybe not do it 100%. We're looking for the best guy. And if we've got to pay a little bit more, we're a $100 million corporation here. We're looking at the arteries of this town, and we need the best qualified guy to do that. If he's a couple bucks more, in my opinion, he's well worth it. We don't want to tell these people on Washington Street that we didn't exhaust every resource and hire the best guy. So, anybody else? Okay, on to the next item, which is comprehensive plan for stormwater management and storm and sanitary sewer issues. This was a request from four of the aldermen, and was on the agenda for the special meeting. I had personally thought that we needed to have the engineering firm on board. We all agree, I think we need a comprehensive plan. But before we could actually start and get the plan rolling, we've got a couple of issues that staff referred us over at Sewers and ComEd and things that we know we got to do, which we're already moving forward on. But before, to implement this comprehensive plan, we need to have a doctor overseeing this and guiding us and holding our hand and working with our staff that's already taxed a lot, and we need a stormwater guru, and that's who we have here. So I'll refer to the alderman that put this, asked for this meeting, Alderman Gutenkopf.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I think our intention was to ensure that we were having this meeting tonight. The reason that we called for a special meeting was that there had been no plans to have a committee of the whole meeting. It's a fifth Monday. The council typically does not meet on the fifth Monday of the month. And in the interest of ensuring that we are continuing to move forward with all of our stormwater planning, four of us signed a formal request to have the meeting, which is something that our code allows us to do. So I think that perhaps what we're doing now, talking about our process, where we're going to go and what we're going to do, is really the fulfillment of our request to have the meeting tonight. So I think that what I'd like to do is to briefly have more of a discussion of kind of what's next. How are we approaching this and where are we going? So now that we've hammered out the parameters of the agreement with Burke's firm, I think what we'd like to, at least what I'd like to do, is to have a conversation about what are our next steps with how we're moving this process forward.
Alderman Mulliner?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that this doesn't need to be a long discussion, but I think that ideally what I'd be looking for is from city staff to prepare for us some sort of a timeline, task list, if you will, of how to accomplish this comprehensive plan. We've done a number of comprehensive plans in the past. We do them for zoning. We do them for all kinds of different things. So this should not be a difficult thing to do, is to put together those components necessary for us to put together a comprehensive plan related to stormwater and sanitary sewer management. And I think that's something that can easily be done. And I don't think any of us are looking for something that's going to last us for 3 or 4 years. I think we're looking for something that gives us a reasonable timeline to get this task accomplished so that we can move this forward, because the citizens are going to be looking forward to how are we going to solve these problems for them. And I think that's really what I would like to ask. I'd like to ask staff, as they do with the comprehensive plan for zoning, as they do with the budget planning, to put together a timeline with a series of tasks that are going to be accomplished so that we all have an idea of what that timeline is going to look like and what the tasks are that they see, so that we can actually get this thing moving forward.
Alderman Brahman or Alderman Pezza?
Thank you. I agree with Alderman Gutenkopf and Alderman Mulliner. I think that the only thing that they didn't state that I would like to understand and maybe have a short discussion on is, so what is next in the immediate term? What are we doing next meeting of the Committee of the Whole? What is our discussion points then? Are we going to see before that meeting the timeline that Alderman Mulliner just mentioned and have a discussion on that? Are we going to start this education process that we just spoke about in the next Committee of the Whole meeting? I think, you know, in my perspective, I would like to see, and I don't know how long the timeline would need to, I don't know how much time it would take to pull together the timeline, but I would like to see that as soon as possible. But starting next meeting, I would like that education process to start up. So my recommendation, and we can discuss as a Committee of the Whole tonight, is for the next Committee of the Whole meeting next Monday, that we start the education process.
Alderman Pezza.
Thank you. Just one thing to add to that. I just want to be sure that as we look at a timeline and we incorporate a timeline, that we commit ourselves to every Monday night, be it committee or council meetings, that we dedicate a portion of every Monday night to meet as a Committee of a Whole, even if it's just to be updated, to make sure we're on target, to also let the public be aware of where we stand, what we're doing, and the progress that we're making. So I'd like that to be a piece of the timeline.
Anybody else? All right. Alderman Shea?
I would just like to add a little bit on to Alderman Pezza's. I'd like to have it like at the end of every like we'll do our city council meeting, and then we'll go to committee meeting of the whole afterwards, and the same with our committee meetings. We'll take care of business first, because there's other things we don't want to get behind on either, and then follow up with committee meetings of the whole afterwards.
Okay. Alderman Morley.
I agree with putting the Committee of the Whole meetings after our council meetings. That gives us all a little motivation to speed through our council meetings. But I would disagree with the notion of putting the Committee of the Whole after committee meetings. I know that there's certain times where I've got 4 things on my agenda, and another committee only have 1 thing, and they'll get done in 20 minutes. It's going to be an hour and a half for me. So I think we do Committee of the Whole after council meetings, but before committee. The other thing, I don't know if it's appropriate, but it's not on here, and while I've got the mic, the city staff's done a great job of constantly updating the website. And for those people who don't know, and I think most people do, FEMA is cutting checks for people who go through the process. I have talked to several, close to a dozen people, and they said, I wouldn't call it a pleasant experience, but it's been very quick, and they already have their checks.
Also, talking about FEMA, Mayor of Westchester contacted me Saturday and mentioned to me that The Cook County, DuPage County office for FEMA is St. Joseph's High School, which isn't located in Westchester, but that FEMA office is open Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. And if there's anybody has issues or questions, or if they get a rejection notice and they want to appeal, that office is open to the public, and it's serving both Cook and DuPage County. So, so Mayor wanted to make me aware. Majority of the, this was a regional hit to 12 counties that were declared disaster areas, and President, with his formal declaration from the federal government. But yeah, we all know of people who already received dollars. They literally reached out on Monday and had people from FEMA at their house on Tuesday and Wednesday, and had money wired in their accounts on Thursday and Friday. So they are acting quickly. That took a lot of support from all the mayors, all the congressmen, all the U.S. senators, Senator Durbin especially, who came directly to Elmhurst and got to our president and was able to convince him that this was important, and I think it was. I think it was worth the lobbying effort, and fortunately we have people getting help. So, and a lot of these people have gotten help from the insurance and still are getting help from FEMA. So sometimes that works out, and we're happy that the federal government is helping out. Alderman Shea.
Yeah, thank you. In 2008, during the flooding, I know FEMA gave DuPage County and Addison Township money to handle flooding problems. I was wondering if they're going to be getting money from FEMA, and if we are going to be able to receive some of that money to use towards fixing their flooding problem.
It's a good question, Alderman Shea. I don't know if City Manager Borchard, from what I understand, I'll let City Manager Borchard really answer this, but the declaration was intended for the residents at this time. I don't know if we actually, the municipalities made the actual dollar amount, the threshold, but I'll let City Manager Borchard elaborate on that.
My understanding is the same, Mr. Mayor, that the declaration by FEMA is limited to private properties, commercial and residential, and they're continuing to evaluate at a national level, FEMA level, support to local governments.
So the overtime, the contract services, the probably close to, I'm just guessing, $500,000 that we spent in the last storm currently will not be reimbursed. I think, but more importantly, the millions of dollars that people lost, people are seeing tens and thousands of dollars going into their accounts. Sometimes they're a couple thousand here, a couple thousand. I know one guy that got $20,000. So this, I think, the people really are the most important benefactors, and they should be. So governments took a hit, but the people really took the hit here. So, Alderman Brown.
Yes, just sticking on the FEMA topic. The monies that the residents receiving, is that to restore the basements back to normal, or could those monies be used for, I don't know, improving their basement by an overhead sewer addition? So is it to replace the furniture lost? Is it to replace the drywall, carpeting, etc.? Or could it be used for overhead sewers if the resident so chooses?
I'll let City Manager Borchard answer this technically, but people are given insurance checks and FEMA checks to restore their homes, and that's what they're waiting for. They don't want to spend money until they know they have protection. So whether it's a check from State Farm or Allstate or American Family, or it's a check from FEMA, they could spend it however they want, but they don't want to put drywall up or carpeting in, or whatever they want to do to fix up their basement until they have an overhead sewer, if that was in fact the problem. Now, there's some areas that an overhead may not. We had water coming in certain first floors. That's not going to fix that particular problem, but for many of the situations, an overhead was a first line of defense. City Manager Borchard, would you like to add?
That is my understanding as well. The FEMA funds are for the restoration of the property, for the ability of the inhabitants to live, and in that regard, there are certain repairs that are authorized and certain replacement of certain equipment that's authorized.
Thank you.
Alderman Gutenkoff and Alderman Morley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we progress in our discussion of planning, I think it's going to be important for us to understand how much money we've spent so far. And so I request that at our next Committee of the Whole meeting, I'd really like to see a summary of what we've spent cleaning up the flood, what we spent addressing some of these issues, what we've spent on outside consultants, I'd really like to get a handle on where we are so far and identify where the funds have been pulled from, because I know we've spent a lot. I just don't know what and how much. So I really appreciate to see that next time.
All right. Alderman Morley?
Yeah, real quick. It's a follow-up to Alderman Bram's question. The FEMA, there's an 800 number for FEMA, and they can answer those questions, but also on the website, there's a frequently asked question and how to fill out the FEMA form. And that question specifically is on there, what money, what they cover, what repairs they cover, et cetera. And it's pretty straightforward.
I was told it takes all of about 10 minutes if you're applying online, so I think federal government's got it down pretty streamlined, so. Any other discussion? Hearing none, City Manager Borchert.
I just wanted to repeat back what I heard and what I will do to assist the attorney in the conversations with Dr. Burke relative to the proposal that's going to morph into a contract and then have an ordinance attached to that for the council's consideration next Tuesday. That would be a contract that would provide for some data collection and simulation to be provided by the Burke firm. Presentation at workshops will be deleted. That will be then done by city staff, and I would say I would seek that Dr. Burke would be allowed to provide support to city staff for the primer material that Educator Rose identified as necessary for there to be an effective outcome from an education program, that there's certain data that might be then prepared by the professionals in that regard, which would be the consultant, to allow that to go on the website, to go to the community, to go to the council, as the community advertises the education workshop, to be then run by the city staff. We get that support from Dr. Burke's contract. Evaluation of possible alternatives as we again continue as a community staff and consultant work through opportunities. We're evaluating those to then forward that on, not certainly to implement, but to get as much information as possible available to pass on to the overall author of the comprehensive plan. The major emphasis would be that Task 5 is the work effort to prepare the draft of a request for qualifications that would have identified for that request for qualifications. A general scope of work is what is intended with the assignment, which is to provide a comprehensive plan to allow the Elmhurst community to move forward 2010 style from where we were before. That's what we'll work on to attach to the ordinance, and the bulk of that would be the deliverable of the RFQ assignment. Ideally, we'll need to have a conversation and dialogue, but we'll try to get that done in 30 to 60 days after the date that the document is approved. That's my understanding.
Very good. Anything else? Hearing none, I ask for a motion to adjourn, please. Alderman Morley, second by Alderman Hipskin. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.